Deputy President David Mabuza has come under fire for heavy criticism for his comments of inferring that homophobia on the African countries, or on the African continent, should be ignored. Mabuza told the National Council of Provinces last week, "We must be decent enough to keep our mouths shut," when asked about gay rights in Uganda and other African countries. This, as Uganda is considering reintroducing anti-homosexuality bill in the country, where the LGBTQI community is regularly harassed and threatened with death. To discuss this, I'm joined in studio by the Executive Director of Human Rights Group Access Chapter 2, Steve Letsike, who's joining us in studio. Steve, good morning and welcome. Good evening, rather. I'm used to the morning. Good evening and welcome to The Full View.
Thank you.
When the Deputy President uttered those words, what went through your mind immediately?
Look, it's a shock. It's a double standard that went through my mind about the role of South Africa in the region, in observing the treaty we signed, which is the African Charter, but also undermining, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. We have a big constitution which is celebrated globally, and I think one of the most important things is how we promote and protect the rights as enshrined in the constitution, but also the constitution must be promoted as part of our foreign policy.
It goes back to a conversation that we should have about understanding what human rights are.
Right.
And whether or not, as South Africa, if we say that we uphold the Constitution, if the Constitution says the LGBTQI community is part of the country and you must recognize their human rights, that means that even any LGBTQI community outside of the country, that their rights too must be recognized.
You see, rights are not an option. It's a privilege that every person has by virtue of being a human being. It's a privilege that we need to make sure that everyone would have. That means in certain instances where there's unjust system, we need to work towards equality, of celebration of these rights, of attaining the rights, of making sure that people can live freely. And rights on its own, it's really about assuring that people have got freedom. And in this case of Uganda, in this case of many South Africans and anyone else in the world, LGBTI persons are citizens, and they are born of people, and they are there and they exist. And all of us being there, we have the right to ensure that we live freely.
How do you then balance that with arguments from some who would say that you need to respect the sovereignty of countries?
I think respecting the sovereignty of country is there, and we value that principle because it's part of democracy. It's accountable governance that every country will self-govern. But where there's violation, that's where we then have to stand up and say, my brother, my sister, you are not doing right by your people. Check that law. That is unjust. You are not doing equality. You are not being a safeguarding, or you are not being a block in any way, but you are just there to advance human rights obligation. And in this case, where states in Africa or anywhere else in the world, we have to stand up because we can't be bystanders. During apartheid, the world was not quiet. People stood with us. We had spaces to put people in exile. We had people supporting those who were in the ground, and people were not quiet. Why? When injustice happened because of sexual orientation and gender identity, we want to be quiet and we want to be decent and morally correct. That's unethical. And I think those views by the Deputy President are the views that we are challenging to say, number two, citizen of our country cannot utter such as part of the oath that he signed to promoting human rights. In
the statement that you've issued, you call on the Deputy President to withdraw his statement made in Parliament and to clarify to South Africans the position South Africa holds when it comes to the foreign policy as well as promotion of human rights. If he doesn't withdraw that statement, what's next?
Well, I think the most important thing, he's my co-chair as well in another council. So we share the same platform. And I think for me, it then questions the authenticity of how leadership is perceived in this case. I will question that. Definitely, we will question that. Secondly, if South Africa does not, in fact, the Deputy President does not withdraw a statement, then there are certain things that we are really questioning around the political will to really advance. That means on its own, South Africa South Africa's value, it's really undermined. South Africa's constitution is undermined. We can't, when we have our president going into investment, talking about how we want to strengthen economy. You cannot strengthen economy when society is bleeding.
Quick one, speaking about the president, next year he takes over as the chairperson of the African Union. Do you think perhaps he should be championing that call?
That's one of the expectations we have. I mean, he's one of the architects of the constitution. So we expect when he take up that role, the leadership, the political will, and the commitment of South Africa will be very greatly expected. South Africa is a beacon of hope in the region because of our constitution that is celebrated globally. So we expect President Ramaphosa, but we also expect Deputy President Mabuza to heed to the call as they took that office as public representatives.
And also taking into consideration that he's the deputy president of the ANC, and the ANC actually has resolutions when it comes to the LGBTQI community.
Absolutely.
Steve Letsike, thank you so much for your time.